What's up guys, my name is Akordidi and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video I'm going to take you on a walkthrough on how I edit my pictures from the beginning to the end. If you're now starting up in editing or retouching in Photoshop, or you need an inspiration or workflow to follow for your editing, then I think this video will be the best for you. So with that said, kindly click on the like icon to help more people reach this video. Without further ado, let's jump straight into Photoshop and start editing. Identifying the imperfections in the image. To start off, I first zoom in and out to examine and mark all imperfections and plan how I will edit and correct them and which tool I will be using to do so. By doing so, I create a new layer and use the brush tool to mark all imperfections on the image. Doing my basic cleanups. Afterwards, I hide my marked layer, press Ctrl and J on the keyboard to duplicate my background layer and start doing my basic cleanups, corrections and removing any unwanted parts of the image. Liquify and transform. So with the basic cleanup done, I then make my marker layer visible to see where I will be focusing next. I will then start with the hair. I will hide the marker layer and zoom into my image with layer 2 selected. I will select the lasso tool and make a selection around the hair. I will use the transform handles to drag and expand the hair to my desired size. After, I will right click to bring up my transform settings and select warp. I will then drag the handles to fine tune my selection to my desire. I will then zoom out to check if everything is okay. I will then check the before and after and then merge the hair layer with the layer 2. Afterwards, I will then right click on the layer 2 and select smart object to change it into a smart object. After that, I will then move to filter and select liquify and then open the liquify panel and reshape the hair to my desire. And press OK. I will zoom in and out to check the image and then proceed to my next step. I noticed that the hair behind her head isn't okay after I switched between the visible marked layer, so I decided to give it a quick fix. I turned off the marked layer, then created a new layer above the layer 4 and zoomed into the hair. Then selected the clone stamp tool at the tools panel. I then sampled areas around that portion and gently brushed the flyaway hairs to remove them. Afterwards, I zoomed out of the image, selected both layers by pressing and holding Shift and clicking on the layer above and below, then right clicked and selected merge layers to merge them into a single layer. Afterwards, I unhide the marker layer to see which portion to edit next. I then zoomed into the right side of the sketch to make some adjustments. I then selected the lasso tool and drew a circle around the part I wanted to edit and pressed Ctrl and J to create a new duplicate layer. I then pressed on Ctrl and T on the keyboard to bring up the transform controls. I positioned it by moving the selected layer upward to where I want, then right clicked and selected warp. I then played around with the warp handles till I got the position of the selection at where I wanted it and selected OK. I then masked the selected layer and selected my brush tool. With black color selected, I brushed gently on the layer mask to remove the unwanted parts of the selection I made. I then zoomed in and out and examined if everything is okay. Then I fine-tuned it and then merged it again with the lower layer. At this point, a like to this video will really be appreciated. Liquifying the body. At this point, I opened the marker layer again to examine what I've done so far. I then created a layer mask on it and cleaned the parts I've already edited to make things more visible to see. I then selected the layer below, right-clicked it and changed it into a smart object. I then moved to the filter at the top menu and selected Liquify. With the Liquify panel loaded, I then adjusted her stomach and some other parts of her body that needed to be adjusted to make the image look more better. After, I zoomed in and out to get a better view of the work, toggled between the preview checker and finally pressed OK to accept changes made. Frequency separation. With all the cleanups done now, I then moved to frequency separation. This is by far one of my favorite parts during my editing process. I've made quite a number of videos covering it, so you can check it out after this video. I finally deleted the marker layer and did a minor adjustment around her waist to hide a portion of her clothes that I didn't like. Afterwards, I duplicated our main layer twice and renamed them texture and color. And created a blank layer between the two. I went on to create my frequency separation adjustment layers and grouped them and named the group frequency separation. I selected the color layer, zoomed into the image to her face where I start my skin smoothing. I then select the lasso tool and started smoothing her face by right-clicking on the selected part and selecting Gaussian blur. I continued that to all her face. I then switched to the mixer brush tool, and with the settings displayed, I started brushing and smoothing her skin further. I then moved to other parts of her body and continued this process until I was fully done and her whole body was looking smooth. Then I selected the texture layer on top and selected the spot healing brush tool. I then brushed on the part I want to hide and disappear to clean up our image further. Outfit and hair retouching. With the color adjustment layer we created still selected and the mixer brush tool still selected, I will then continue to brush gently on her skirt to smoothen and clear some of the wrinkles from it. Afterwards, I zoomed into the hair again and used the lasso tool to select and apply Gaussian blur on it. Then zoomed out to check if I like the result. I realized some quick LIQUIFY adjustments I had to make, so went on and did it as fast as I could. I accepted the changes and went on to my next step. Eye whitening and editing. At this point, I moved on to the editing of the eye. I first and foremost created a merged layer of everything I've done so far into a single layer by pressing Shift, Alt, Ctrl and E. I then went to the new adjustment layer icon and selected the channel mixer adjustment layer. I changed the blend mode to screen. I selected the layer mask and pressed Ctrl and I to invert it. I then selected the brush tool and changed the fill to white by pressing X on the keyboard. I then zoomed into the eye and painted gently on the white in the eye. Then lowered the opacity as fit. I created a new hue and saturation adjustment layer. Selected colorize. I then played around with the sliders to get the color I prefer and then clicked on the layer mask, inverted it and painted on the black in the eye just to change the color of the eye. Now I added more detail in the eye. I created a curves adjustment layer and pulled the midtones down to create a dark image. I then inverted it and with the brush tool selected, I brushed on the edges of the blue eye just to add some details to it. I created another curves adjustment layer, but this time I did the opposite by dragging the midtones up to lighten my image and change the blend mode to screen. Then inverted the layer mask so that I can manually apply the effect to where I want. I then painted with the brush tool to add some light in her pupil. I zoomed in and played around with the opacity slider to make sure everything is fine. Then I moved to my next step. Skin tones. I grouped the eye layer in one folder, then created a new gradient map adjustment layer. I toggled through a couple of options and finally settled on one for the skin tone. I reduced the opacity to reduce its strength. Then I changed the blend mode to color. I then selected and masked the image and copied its layer mask to the newly created gradient map. I deleted the original layer mask. Afterwards, I zoomed into the image and with the brush tool selected and set to black, I brushed off all the parts I don't want the effect to show, leaving only the skin. I double checked by holding Alt and clicking on the layer mask to see the work I've done and moved on to my next stage. Dodge and burn. For this process, I created a new curves adjustment layer, made it bright by pulling the center of the curve up. Then I set the blend mode to luminosity. I then double clicked on the layer to bring up the blend if options. I split the underlying layer in two by pressing and holding Alt and clicking on the handle, then playing around with the sliders to perfectly blend the effect on my image. I have a full tutorial on this you can check out, link in the description below. I then copied the layer mask below by pressing and holding Alt on the keyboard and dragging the layer mask onto the curves layer. This will allow the effect to only appear on the skin. Background art. I proceeded to add in some artwork to my background. I have already downloaded some artworks online, so I just dragged and dropped it on my image in Photoshop, added a layer mask to it and brushed off the part I don't want to show on my model. I then added a levels adjustment layer and balanced how the background looked in the overall image. Background color. Last but not least, I added a hue and saturation adjustment layer to the background and played around with the sliders to get a matching color I want in my image. I duplicated the old layer mask on it to get only the background selected and brushed off all the parts I didn't want. I played around with the hue and saturation sliders again till I was satisfied with the colors I wanted and added a levels adjustment layer again and clipped it to it. I played around with the level sliders till everything was okay, and then moved to my next step, which is color grading. Color grading. With color grading, I normally like to do that with the selective color. I'll be doing a full tutorial on my color grading over here for you guys to see how I color grade my images fully. But with this one, I played with the blacks first, then to the grays, then to the whites. Afterwards, I moved to the other colors and played around with them till I got the colors that I wanted. I then added a radial gradient to get a vignette effect on my image, and everything was looking good for me. I added some curves adjustment layer later to add a little bit of light to it, and that was it. I then saved it up, and this is the result.